name is Bonnie Steepleton. I'm Director of Student and Career Services at the University of New Mexico School of Law. And today we have Professor Laura Spitz, who's going to tell us about contracts and careers in contracts. Welcome, Professor, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great, thanks. So contracts, tell me about that.
I've loved contracts since I took contracts in 1990. And in all through my career, regardless of the area of law I've practiced, what I've always done is focus on contracts.
Tell me what contracts means to you in context of practice.
For me, contracts are all about relationship creation. You get to meet with people who in all areas of law and all areas of life and help them document a relationship that they're trying to pursue with other human beings or corporations, and super fun.
So kind of examples?
Yeah, sure. So I've practiced actually labor law, business law, and family law. And in all of those contexts, I've drafted contracts or worked with people in the interpretation of contracts. So when I practiced labor law, I was focused on collective agreements. And when I practiced family law, what I did was family creation agreements. So surrogacy, sperm donorship, marriage contracts. And then for the last 25 years, I've practiced business law and primarily done transactional work.
That sounds really interesting. So like in the family law arena, would that include adoption or other sort of things?
Yeah. I mean, you raise a really interesting point, because contracts get drafted within the context of legal frameworks. So part of contract drafting is understanding the statutory and court rules around in that area. So for adoption, there are statutes that deal with adoption. And if you're going to also draft a contract between people who are trying to build a relationship or effectuate an adoption or organize their relationship for an adoption, they have to do it within that context. So you'd have to understand the statute and also know how to draft.
That is fascinating, especially for me as a career services person, because I get hung up on labels sometimes. So when I think of adoption, it would never occur to me to think of that area of the practice as also contracts.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. So for students then, what would you recommend they do in order to be exploring contract law in all of these different contexts?
The first thing you'd want to, happily for me, because I love it, you have to take contracts in the first year curriculum. I feel like there's other faculty who are passionate about their area of law and they can't make students do it. And I can make students do it because they have to take it as one else. But I would also take advanced contracts classes. And you wouldn't know sometimes that it's a contracts class. So for example, the sale of goods is a contracts class. There are drafting classes that are contracts focused. You would, and then depending on what area of law you're interested in. So if you're interested in family law, or you're interested in insurance law, or you're interested in labor law, you would take those areas of law in addition to your contracts classes. And then you could practice contracts in that area of law.
That also strikes me as interesting, because another stereotype I engage on a regular basis is when I think of contracts, I think of a private civil practice. But you said labor law, so that makes me think that there may be opportunities to practice it with government or nonprofits in this doctrinal area. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. So the government enters into all kinds of contracts, from agreements with other government agencies to purchasing and selling. So the government actually sells sometimes, and the government also purchases a lot. And that's the area of law called procurement. And the government has to have lawyers who are drafting contracts for them. And they also have to have litigators who represent the government in breach of contract claims.
So are contract cases litigated often? Are there other things that happen?
Yes. So I'll back up. Contract breaches or contract disputes often get resolved in mediation or in arbitration. So you could, if you were a person who was really interested in alternative dispute resolution, you could do it in the area of contract law. So you could marry those two interests. You could yourself become an arbitrator or a mediator and mediate contract disputes or arbitrate contract disputes. But contract disputes also end up in court. So you could be a litigator who is a specialist in contract breakdown and represent clients in their breach of contract claims. And I'll just give you one more example. So let's say I mentioned insurance law, labor law, family law. Let's say what you love is construction law. New Mexico the economy in New Mexico is rich with construction. It would be a cool time to be a construction lawyer. I know that doesn't sound like that's cool, but it would be a cool time to be a construction lawyer. And construction is just made up of a web of contracts between suppliers and builders and electricians and all the people who go into making up I don't do construction law, but there are lots of folks who go into building, and you could be an expert in that.
Right. So another thought that occurs to me, because this is really sparking my imagination, something else that's on fire right now in New Mexico is the movie industry.
Yes, so many cool contracts. Yes.
Right. I just thought of that. Like you have an agent and you have a movie you're doing, and even if you're not an actor, you have people that are building sets and doing all these other things. I imagine there's a lot of contract law in that field. Is that right?
It's 100% just contract law because it's contracts between film industry, filmmakers and actors, filmmakers and suppliers, filmmakers and the folks who come and set up the food, for example, catering. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
Wow. This is huge. There's a lot to do there. I'm excited.
Well, there's really only two ways. So your life is organized in only one of two ways. You either have rules that the government has made for you. Those are public rules. Or you have all the rules you've created for yourself. And those are contract rules. You structure your own relationships in your life and you do it by contract. So there's actually no area of life that you might be interested in that you couldn't practice contract law.
Wow. That's very eloquent and inspiring. So how do you think students who are getting ready to graduate or new people with their license could be looking for this kind of work? I mean, what would you recommend people do in order to position themselves to be a good applicant somewhere?
If what you're interested in, so you need to think of two things. Students need to decide essentially two things. They need to decide, three things, I lied. They need to decide an area that's interesting to them. So the film industry, the construction industry, the oil industry, that kind of thing. Do they have something that really they're passionate about? Then they need to think about whether they want to do it publicly or privately. So they could do that for the government or they could do that for private actors, private citizens, or private corporations. Yeah. And then they need the skills. So the classes I mentioned, like they need to have drafting skills and contract interpretation skills, the kinds of things you'd get in those advanced classes. If they have those things, and then they come and see me, I'll help them put together their letter. But they will be so super well positioned in the market to just move into the world because they'll approach their career sort of multi-pronged. And there's no wrong choices at that point. Let's say you end up with the government because that's the job that's open and you get really skilled at negotiating contracts for the government. Then if you want to move into private industry, you're going to get a job because private industry is going to negotiate with the government and you're going to have all this really cool experience. If you start in private industry and the government is looking for someone, there's like no wrong choice at that point. But those are the three things to think about. Is there an area of law? Do you have the skills? And do you want to at least start by working for the government or private law firms or private industry?
Well, that really sounds to me appealing. And also it demystifies that whole notion of, like I said before, when I think of contracts, it's sort of overwhelming. It's a monolith. Like, I don't even know what that means. But in hearing how you've broken it down, and especially with the passion areas, it's really inspiring, and I hope that the students will reach out to you. Was there anything else you wanted to add that I didn't ask you about contracts? I think.
Well, maybe I would just say that, I started by saying that I love relationship creation, and that's why I do this, because it's so fun. And if you're a really good contract drafter, you can provide for relationship breakdown in the contract itself. So it can happen without dispute, essentially. You can trigger a relationship breakdown mechanism in the contract, and just the relationship can be over. But let's say you're a person who comes to law school because you love litigating and you love arguing and being an advocate. Then there's still lots you can do in contract law. You can still be the kind of person who assists clients with relationship breakdown. It's just not what I do. But if that's what you love, you should still think about it, career and contracts.
That sounds really great. Well, I sure appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for including me.
Thank you.